Hey everybody, Eric Switzer here, joined by the gamer's editor-in-chief, Stacey Henley.
Hello.
Stacey, I've roped you in once again to talk about World of Warcraft.
Yes, I came back from Gamescom yesterday and I was on vacation for a week after that, so I've had 2 weeks of only washing my hair in a hotel shower. So I don't look my best, but I am up bright and early to talk about World of Warcraft.
I get you up first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
I don't know how you ended up being my WoW buddy, but I feel like I can't talk to anybody else at this point.
Well, you say that, but actually, I now am somewhat of a WoW expert because when I actually haven't told you this, this is now news to you. This isn't just us
Uh-huh.
doing a bit for the camera. When I was at Gamescom, I rode the World of Warcraft roller coaster that they had at Gamescom. They had a virtual 4X VR roller coaster.
Oh my.
You are it wasn't it was a motorbike, but in the game it was like a griffin, and you flew through the city. And the problem with it was I couldn't wear my glasses with it, so the queen would say like, "Look upon my wonders," and I would just like, "Oh yes," like blurry orange goo. But I now know everything there is to know about World of Warcraft because I rode the roller coaster.
Wow, a writable lesson in Azeroth. I love
Yes.
that. I got to find that. So we talked about this, The War Within,
Yeah.
a few months ago. At the time, I had only played, just kind of dabbled in the first zone and
Mm.
tried out a delve, so it was very much just a sample of it. I've played through the whole campaign now
Okay.
and a little bit more. And there's a lot of it that I'm surprised about, and a lot of it that I like a lot more than I thought I would. So I kind of want to talk you through what's going on in WoW. So as we talked about before, this is like the beginning of this three expansion saga, the
Yeah.
Worldsoul Saga. And this is picking up on the threads sort of left, sort of abandoned by Legion 10 years ago, which is not coincidentally when Chris Metzen retired.
Yeah. He's back now.
And now he's back, and we're picking up kind of where we left off. Of course, we're not just going to ignore everything that's happened in between, but sort of that overarching plot about the secret history of the universe. We're starting to unravel here. So this is the first chapter of the first act of this big sweeping story,
Mm-hmm.
and so it is very much set up and world building and introduction and reintroductions too, because the main characters of this story have not been part of the story for some time. One of them's Anduin Wren. He's a very important character and has been for a very long time, but he also hasn't been around for a couple years now.
Right.
And then the other one is Sylvana's sister, who really hasn't been part of the story since Legion. So there's this sense of, like I said, sort of like picking up where we left off, but like where we left off 10 years ago ish.
Yeah.
8 years, 10 years. So that's very cool because it has this sort of return to form kind of feeling, like trying to capture the golden age. I think a lot of people consider Legion to be the best when WoW was at its best.
Yeah, because I mean, Warcraft's been consistently popular. It's kind of the benchmark really for a game that can just last and last and last. But I think more certainly casual people like me who aren't involved in the game, and I think people from speaking to people like you feel like it has waned a little bit over the past few years. I know Dragonfly was very popular, but I think prior to that there was a little bit of a sense that it was still struggling to find where it was going to go next. I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was when it was the biggest game in the world for
Yeah.
a period. It hasn't really been that over the last decade. It's been very, very popular and got a lot of fans, but it's not really had that apex of gaming sense
Yeah.
really for the last decade and a half.
Yeah, and games don't rebound. You know,
Yeah.
they peak and then they fall off. And we're 20 years into WoW. Like this is the 20th year. So I
Yeah.
think it would not be surprising if we were kind of trailing off, kind of fading out. And they're with this like 3-part story. They're trying to send the message like WoW isn't dying. Like this is our second wind. You
Yeah.
know, we're entering the second golden age of WoW. That's what they're trying to sell. And I think that the War Within actually does a really good job of establishing that. in part by being so different than what's come before. And I think if you are very casual or an outside observer, then it probably just looks like WoW as it's always been. You do some quests and you go to different places and you meet different people. But
Sure.
the structure of this expansion is really surprising. The campaign itself is, I think, half the length of every other campaign there's ever been. I got through the entire story in 2 sittings.
Wow.
Yeah, and it would typically take me 20 to 30. I think if you really mainline a WoW quest, it's like 10 hours. And this took me like 2 evenings to sort of casually get through. And what's more, it follows the, like, you'll start in this zone, go to the next zone, go to the next zone, go to the next zone, but it doesn't trap you in each of those places like a WoW expansion typically does, where it's like, welcome to this city and meet all these people and learn about them. Okay, we're done here. Now we're going to go to the next place and meet these people. In this story, in The War Within, it is one adventure that happens to cross through all these places. So it has this really nice natural flow. Yes, it is showing you the world, and yes, it is introducing you to the factions and the culture and the conflict and the politics, but it's on the course of a very like breakneck adventure that just happens to just cross through all these places naturally.
It's interesting because as an outsider, that to me wouldn't be the appeal. I know the game is not necessarily made to appeal to me, but I feel like saying we've made the story much shorter and there's kind of essentially less to do in it, that feels like kind of going against the grain of how games are trying to bring people in. I remember we discussed Diablo 4 when that came out, and you kind of called it at the time. You said there's not sure how long this will last, and the type of game Diablo is it kind of going to be able to iterate on expansion upon expansion, but the story's great. It's the first time we've had a great story. I feel like a lot of games are moving towards that narrative power. So it's interesting that World of Warcraft, while it's kind of trying to, I guess, modernize itself into having a second golden age, is streamlining the story so much that you can kind of get through the bulk of it, almost like a kind of like at the start of Star Wars when it goes, here is the plot of the movie. Now watch the movie. It kind of, I guess, frees you up to do some of the World of Warcraft stuff as opposed to trying to teach you every single thing you need to know within the story.
Yeah, at first I found it very counterintuitive. At first I was like, okay, this is the same price as every expansion, and yet it feels like it took me half the time to beat it. I think that the sort of like dollar value, like dollars per enjoyment
we've discussed
hour
that
thing.
with like indie games and AAA games before, and like this indie game only takes 5 hours, and this AAA game takes 100 hours, so it should be like 20 times the price.
I thought, a lot of those people are going to be really put off by this.
Yeah.
But it seems like a lot of people actually get it, especially people that have been with WoW for a long time. And I think
which is a lot of the player base, we should say. It doesn't really pick it. The only way you get into World of Warcraft is if you have friends who already play it these days, or you've been playing it for 2 decades.
But I think this was a really calculated risk to do it this way. And the more that I think about it, the more I think it's really smart because, for the people that don't care about the campaign, they want to get through it as fast as possible anyway. They're skipping the cutscenes and they're just trying to get to the dungeons,
sure.
And so it's shorter for them. Great. For people that heard, Chris Metzen's back. We're picking up off of Legion. I haven't played in 10 years, but maybe I'll check it out. It's a really small ask.
Bite-sized.
The investment, it's like, maybe I'll come back to WoW, and then you hear, that the campaign's only 5 hours. Okay, I can do that. And so you get these little like micro investments. There's a lot more opportunities to reinvest in the game. And then if you happen to be completely new to WoW and you hear, it's this 3-act story and this is the very beginning of it. Again, I think having a very bite-sized campaign that is so driven, it is so like laser focused on telling this story that it's full of cutscenes, it's full of character moments. It's like a very narrative focused campaign. I think it sort of is appealing to everyone. And they don't sacrifice content. It's still there. It's just all supplemental. So when you finish that campaign, if you felt like you missed that, oh, I didn't get to see this whole zone and do every quest and experience all the little stories, they're still there. It's just all post campaign stuff. I don't think they cut the number of quests. They just rebalanced how much is in the story and how much is post story.
Yeah, so if you want to spend, as you say, 20 or 30 hours playing through the new stuff, and it's not even just like doing the dungeons over and over and over again, but the actual first time experience of things in War Within, you still get a chance to do it. It's just no longer mandatory, I guess.
Yeah.
That is an interesting direction, because you're right, like a lot of these types of games tend to have two sorts of player bases. You know, we have a lot of Final Fantasy XIV fans at the site, and they really, really heavily invest in the narrative of it. But at a competitive level, or at a kind of more hardcore level, everyone cares about doing the dungeons on the highest difficulty and getting the best gear, and etc., etc. And I think World of Warcraft has always been a little bit more towards the more hardcore side. It's always been a little bit more appealing to players who want to kind of min-max and grind, and it's had a story to it. You know, I mean, Sylvanas is a very, very iconic character, even away from World of Warcraft. But I think it probably does make sense, being as an outsider, to have that focus shifted into, here is the bit you need to get through because we want you to have some understanding. We want this to be a series of dungeons. We want there to be some weight behind it. And here is the things you want to do. If your power fantasy for the game is to be an adventurer who saves the day, or who saves the village, or etc., then here are the extra things you can do. And if what you want to do actually is the more mechanically demanding things, you can access them earlier without needing to do this. Because I guess if you only play for the story, you don't need to do all the hardcore dungeons over and over. But if you only play for the hardcore dungeons, you do need to do the story. So there's maybe that little bit of imbalance that they've addressed, given the proclivities of the player base.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a very calculated, very smart way to measure it out, to structure it. But it's also very aware of what it is, because it's not even fair to say it's like the first act of a 3-act story, because it's the first chapter of the first act, right?
Yeah.
Because this is a story that will continue throughout the War Within's life over the next, traditionally 2 years, but they said these expansions are going to be coming quicker than they ever have before. So we can imagine a year and a half or a year or whatever of the War Within. So this is just the beginning of the first act. And so it doesn't really go anywhere. I mean, there's a huge moment that happens in the intro. There's a great hook and a great, like, a very serious thing that happens right at the start of this. And then the rest of it is like, let's go see what's happening inside the world. Like, who's down there? What's going on? So
that's a very traditional RPG thing, though, isn't it? They start with a big, Skyrim's probably the most famous one. But then after you've escaped and the dragon has come, you just kind of wander around and pick up wheels of cheese for 3 hours in Skyrim.
Yeah. But then at the end, nothing's really happened.
Yeah.
So they're not asking you to spend, 10 to 15 hours on a story that doesn't go anywhere. They're just asking you to spend 5 hours on a story that doesn't go anywhere. And I think that feels fine.
It's a reasonable ask for a story that is going to add 50 to 60 more hours over the course of the next 18 months.
Yes. Yeah. So that, I thought, was a really great thing about it. And the other thing, and I say this about every WoW expansion lately, the last few, but the level designers, like the art direction on this, just really blew me away. I feel like they just outdo themselves every time. And this is no exception. The sort of poster zone of this expansion is called Hollowfall. So there's one, the structure of the expansion is you begin on the Isle of Dorn. It's just a big island, and then there is a underground highway that takes you from that island into the middle of the planet. And then there's 3 distinct zones inside that planet. And one of those zones is called Hollowfell. This is where the Arathi live. The Arathi are ancient humans, are the predecessors of the human race. They
Prometheus
live.
style.
Yeah, yeah. They live in this huge basin with rivers and a big ocean, and they live beneath this massive crystal stuck in the ceiling of the cavern that gives them light and warmth. It's their sun, and it is corrupted with void, and it will occasionally pulse with dark energy, and it creates this day-night cycle in this zone where it goes dark and then more evil comes out. So it sort of changes which activities you can access. And that's just not, I mean, like WoW has day night cycles, but not in such a dynamic or like interactive way.
Yeah.
Not where like the story and the world building is built around this idea.
It's just a nice visual quirk, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And they travel around on big steampunk airships. It's such a cool zone, and all of the zones have really interesting things going on. But I think that's kind of the centerpiece of the expansion.
How did they all mesh with Dragonfly? Because I remember when this was revealed, or when you hadn't played it at the time, we just kind of knew a little bit about the story. You'd said that when Dragonfly came out, they kind of had to revolutionize the whole game because you had to be able to fly dragons and things everywhere. You couldn't just do it in that expansion. Is that something that is kind of a staple of WoW going forward now, and it's kind of crucial or at least useful in this expansion, or is it just kind of you can do that if you want?
Yeah, I mean it has to be. When Dragonflight came out, that was the big question. Was like, well, you can't go backwards. Like this is a thing now. So yeah, now with the War Within, they added 468 of the mounts to dragon riding. So like virtually all of your flying mounts can do the dragon flying thing. And so the zones had to be designed around the idea that, and you fly right from the start. So the days of having to wait a year before you can fly through a zone are over. You fly immediately because the world is built for it. So questing is faster. I'm sure that's part of the reason why the campaign is so much shorter. Yeah, that you just bullet from one quest to the next. You just fly back and forth. Yeah, I think the zones felt not quite as sprawling as they did in Dragonflight, and I'm sure the fact that there's a ceiling over your head is a factor to make it feel more claustrophobic. But they still have they take that sort of prompt of like Journey to the Center of the Earth and stretch it as far as possible. Like all the zones feel very different, despite the fact that you're just in a cavern. You know, the way that they design caves within caves to make these locations feel unique is really impressive.
And I mean, you said it's the 20th year of World of Warcraft. The big thing is caves. Like that's what most dungeons are in. They've had a long history of taking quite typical fantasy settings. I mean, even the going inside of a planet isn't new to them. There's another game doing that right now, isn't there? I think so. They've always done that idea of making tropes feel a little bit more unique. Seems to be one of Warcraft's kind of big hooks that has managed to establish it as like this titan, still 20 years on, in the fantasy genre.
Yeah, for sure. The other big thing that gives War Within its identity, I think, is, and we kind of talked about this in the preview, but now I've really experienced it, is this sort of loosening of the reins and a willingness to let people play WoW the way they want rather than how WoW is meant to be played. And you really can feel that. The big thing is the Warband, which is a new system that basically shares progress between characters. And that's always something that a lot of people have wanted, and it's always been very much out of the question.
Yeah.
And it just feels like this wall has been broken down between your characters, and it really changes how you approach the game and how you think about what you can do when all your stuff is shared, not just your items, but your progress, your renown, like your reputation with factions is shared between characters. You're not starting over from scratch with each new character anymore. Which means it's so much easier to balance different characters and different roles and just get more out of the game.
Yeah.
If you want to do that.
And I think it's almost like eroding this idea that it's not a game. I think sometimes developers have that in their heads, like, well, this character has not gone through this, so they wouldn't know it. But the players, as much as they immerse themselves, and it's the most vibrant world ever, it's a video game, right? You want to play it your way, and I think there's a lot of, we've spoken a lot before about the ways that Pokemon Go is very against its own player base.
Yeah.
Playing the way it wants to play. So there's a lot of games, I think, that push back against it just because they go. They almost think it's realer than the players. They don't really trust the players to understand that if we give you video game things, you'll stop believing it. You'll stop being immersed. And I think that's probably been an issue with some of the other MMOs over the years. And it's nice to see that World of Warcraft is, I don't know about leading the charge, but certainly one of the biggest games to just ease that progression barrier that I think affects a lot of them. Because a lot of players do play as 2 or 3 different characters because they want the different roles. They want to play in different kind of play styles. They don't know which one's going to get kind of buffed in various different patches and things. So I think it's pretty common that players do that. And it's nobody who does that says their favorite thing is seeing the opening cutscene 3 times.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it is sort of like a cultural shift and a different approach to how designers design games, or versus how much of it is WoW's been around for 20 years and maybe we need to give some people some slack if we want to attract new people or keep people around or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. It's I guess it's earned the right to do that as well. It's funny to say it's earned the right to listen to its players, because I guess games can do that anytime. But it's in a position to be able to do things that maybe other games would say, oh, well, if we do this, then players will lose interest, or players, that's not how kind of RPGs work or MMOs work. Sorry. I think it's a positive change. Be interesting to see as we get past the first chapter of the first act into the kind of meat and bones of the story, and the world gets more vast, how that changes how players engage with it. Because a lot of players playing World of Warcraft are creatures of habit. They've been playing it for 20 years. And this is a pretty fundamental change.
Yep. Yeah. I wanted to talk a bit about the early access before I forget.
Okay.
Which has been controversial. And I'm trying to remember if they have never done it before, and that's why. I can't recall, but they did the thing that every game does now, where
it's early access for 3 days if you pre-order it for an extra like $20.
Yeah, so it launched Monday at 3 p.m., but if you had the deluxe edition, you could play the previous Thursday at 3 p.m. So that's Thursday, Friday, access. Saturday, Sunday, and then half of Monday, right? So 4.5 days, I guess. Plus you got the deluxe edition stuff. Whatever.
Yeah, there's stuff that comes with that. Absolutely, yeah.
It's like a month of subscription, and there's a mount, whatever. You also get the stuff. I don't like that. No. I don't like that whole thing, and calling it early access. Like, that's just when the game came out, and then the game comes out a different time if you pay less. I just hate the framing of it. But also, and I don't want to make a big deal about this. I just think it's kind of interesting. There is the new end game mode. They're called delves. They're like micro dungeons.
Yes, I remember you saying that during the preview.
They're very cool. In these dungeons, you have Bronzebeard, the adventure dwarf. He goes with you. Okay. They nerfed Bron on either Sunday or Monday morning.
Right.
So
early access players, air quotes.
So the early access players got a stronger Bron.
Okay.
than the launch. And this really is not that consequential, but I mean,
It's just kind of not
where do
cool.
we draw the line,
Yeah.
because that is a very short step away from like everybody's stronger, you get double XP, like, like where do we draw the line from when this early access stuff gets too gross?
It's like in I know you play a few of the like Pokemon Unite and those kinds of games. There's always whenever a new character comes out, they're always really strong. So everyone
Yeah.
plays them, and then the devs go, "Oh, we made them too strong by mistake." But it's not really a mistake. It's so you play as the new character, you buy the stuff for the new character. He won't leveled up, won't have any cosmetics for. And I don't. I have no idea if this was a mistake or not. It just seems weird. Maybe a lot of the hardcore players, who will have been the players who bought the early access, quote unquote, beat the dungeons or the delves easier than they thought, and they thought, right, well, we need to make the assistant a little bit, less involved. But it does seem odd. I agree. I don't want to make too big a deal out of it because I don't think it's really that consequential. But I think it's really strange. I think it's oddly disrespectful actually to call the early access. Early access is a period of months that developers use very carefully and learn from. Games like
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate are as good as they are because they used early access. Hades is currently in early access because it's been out for about 5 months
Yeah.
in an unfinished state, and they're deliberately not letting you do certain things. It's odd to release the game 4 days early, call it something it's not, and make it easier. It's kind of the inverse of what happened with Suicide Squad. I just remember earlier in the year, Suicide Squad had a similar early access period. It came out 5 days earlier. It wasn't even that. I think it was like 3 days early. But on the first day, they had server maintenance, so you couldn't play it. And I felt sorry for everyone who bought Suicide Squad, really, but I felt especially sorry for those people because, like, you've paid to play the game early. It was advertised you can play the game early, and then we went, you can't play because we're busy fixing it. And they can get away with it because it's early access. Hey, these things happen. I just think it's a little odd.
So the opposite thing happened with War Within. The when it launched on Thursday, smooth sailing, servers totally fine. But then on Monday, when the floodgates opened for everyone, nobody could get online. Servers were down.
Yeah.
So it's all these sort of like unspoken benefits of the early access that they can't advertise. You can't put in the column like, and don't forget the servers are going to be a mess on Monday. So this gives you 3 days to play when it's totally smooth. Like they're never going to advertise this stuff, but it exists. But like you are paying for these things. Yeah. This is what you're paying for. You're paying for the stronger brawn. You're paying for the better server, like, and the 3 days. So yeah, I don't know. I don't like it. And it's only going to get worse.
It is. I think especially as I know Warcraft being a PC game has been ahead of the curve with this, but I think as everything moves towards an all-digital future, it's going to get a lot worse because traditionally deluxe editions you get a funny hat and you get a sticker, and and I know they still do the collector's editions, but they now tend to be hugely expensive things with statues that don't even give you the game. There's collector's editions coming out this year. Yeah. You get you get a steel book and you get figurines and stuff, and it's like, but no game, not even a game code. Yeah, because you've got to also buy the game. You're just buying tat.
Yeah.
I do think it's going to get worse.
Okay, so then on the delves, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and this sort of ties back to this idea of like playing the way you want. This expansion is so solo player friendly, which is pretty shocking for WoW. There's a story beat where you need to play a dungeon. This is pretty common. Like sometime through the story, it introduces you to the dungeon. I went into the dungeon, like I queued up. Queue popped instantly. I was like, oh, that's lucky. Went in with a party and everybody just stood there. Like the tank just stood there. And I'm waiting for him to start because the tank leads us through the dungeon. And I'm just looking at the tank and I see on the screen a checkbox for lead or follow. And I realize they're bots. They put me in a story dungeon with NPCs, and I can either lead it myself or I can instruct the tank to lead it. And you can play all of the dungeons in this expansion with bots, with followers. That's a totally new thing. And if you just want to experience the content, like there you go. Now you can. And the whole thing with delves, this is the first end game activity, and end game meaning like it's part of this rotation where once a week you get an upgrade. You're like guaranteed an upgraded piece of gear if you push far enough. You can do this by yourself. Through all of history, you'd either have to raid, you had to play PvP, or you had to do mythic dungeons. And all of those you have to play with other people. It's an MMO.
Yeah.
But you can do these delves by yourself with AI Braun, who's been nerfed, and get an upgrade every week. So like you can have a competitively. Now, why do you need to be competitively geared if all you're doing is delves? Just push delves further. Like you can just have this solo loop where you're just getting stronger and stronger so you can do this thing by yourself. And I mean, that's great. That's great. People want to do it.
It's another one of those like we've always done it this way. Why? I don't know. Like like we were saying before about leveling up 2 characters. It seems like something that is just kind of there because traditionally it has been there. And I know it's part of how World of Warcraft played in MMOs, and in some ways, you know, if you want to pontificate on society, it is a little bit sad that we're moving to the point where why are you playing World of Warcraft to play by yourself? You know, like that. There's plenty of games you can play by yourself. World of Warcraft doesn't immediately seem to be one of them. But maybe as you know, 20 years, maybe as your friends have drifted away from it. Maybe as you're kind of getting into it and you don't want to start with people who've been playing it for a long time. There are reasons for it, I suppose. And it's cool that it's definitely very cool that the option exists. I guess that I feel it's a little bit odd to kind of do. We have a load of solo stuff in an expansion that is pretty light on story. Again, they seem like they don't necessarily go together, but as you say, it's building towards something bigger.
And it's solo options. You don't have to do the delves by yourself.
People who have been playing in a clan, or are they called clans in World of Warcraft? Yeah, people who've been playing in a clan for like this whole time, they'll still do the thing together. You know, they'll still finish work on a Friday and they'll sit down and they'll spend 6 hours together, just pizza and beer, the dungeons. Yeah, that option obviously always has to exist. They can never lose that element of Warcraft, I don't think.
Yeah, it's just more options, and it totally makes sense for where WoW is today. So the only other kind of drama going on is like there's a lot of time gates, and I'm a Destiny person, so I am fully aware of time gates. I guess I'm conditioned to not be bothered by them. But they put out their roadmap, and it was like I don't know why anybody's that upset about this stuff, but there's a new allied race that you can play as. They're called the Earthen. They're dwarves. They're a new kind of dwarf. But you can't get them until season 1 starts on September 9th. Right. There was a whole bunch of stuff that didn't unlock during early access that started today with the launch. So there's this little kind of breadcrumb over the next few weeks, and then forever after that.
Yeah, of course.
But it's a little bit more incremental time gating when WoW is sort of more used to like big patches. Mm-hmm. Like every 6 months, here's a bunch of stuff, and then events. And so I think people are a little, I don't know, they're a little worried about these little time gates.
I wonder if that's part of the pattern you mentioned of they want to try and speed this one up. I wonder if deliberately kind of planning things. The game will still break because it's an MMO and it's a game in 2024. Like something will go wrong with it, and it'll need to be patched and fixed, and they'll find things that need to be nerfed, like Bronzebeard. But generally, I think if you budget for here are some smaller changes that are coming, that's a bit better in terms of workload than every few months we're going to do a patch. Because in the patch, you're kind of expected to do everything, and there'll still be fixes people want. But I think if you say in advance we're doing this, 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 and this, it kind of clues in players' expectations a little bit. It's not too dissimilar from when there's a big Jeff Keighley show and he goes, "Don't expect any reveals, even if there are reveals." He's saying that because he doesn't want you to go, "Where's GTA 6? Where's Silk Song?" Or when Nintendo does a thing and they say, "We're not going to be talking about the Switch 2." They it feels like it kind of maybe is a part of that pattern of we are going to try and be faster. The trade-off for that is we are doing smaller things more often as opposed to fixing everything in the game, laying a break for 3 months, then fixing everything in the game.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth keeping in mind that this team is recently unionized.
Yes.
I mean, what we're getting today has been in development much longer than that. But as we look at the future of WoW, I think the way that the game is made will definitely change because the standards are higher at the studio. So, and that's a good thing. And if that means shorter campaigns or whatever, obviously a good trade-off. But we'll see how people react. I think at this point, if people are getting what they're used to, if they're getting their raid, they're getting their 8 mythic dungeons, and if the story is hitting, because I think that, interestingly enough, has been the biggest point of contention in WoW for many years. Obviously, everybody's got a problem with everything all the time.
Sure.
But generally,
really good 2024.
Yeah, the big contrast with player expectation for WoW is that the story has been missing for a long time. And Dragonflight was such a palate cleanser from the whole Sylvanas saga, but it also was very inconsequential. It very much felt like a side adventure. And while I thought that was like sort of needed at the time, and I enjoyed the whimsy of Dragonflight, getting back into a like long-term episodic, highly consequential story feels great. It's exciting. It's like, I can't wait to see where this goes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I remember seeing the reception of Dragonflight, and everyone did seem like they were having a really good time with it. It seemed to be quite positively reviewed, and people seem to enjoy playing the game. But I, as I say, Sylvanas, iconic character, I couldn't tell you a single character that was in that expansion. I couldn't tell you a single plot beat, I think, that happened. I don't remember seeing, and even games that I don't play, I'm aware of things that happen in Destiny. I'm aware of how other games tell their story because the characters become revered, and I see news stories on it. I speak to people who play the game. I just have a Twitter account that obviously leans very heavily towards games, and it feels like Dragonflight. It was kind of reminded me of when Spider-Man came out, and there were loads of clips of like Spider-Man just swinging.
Yeah,
but there was no, I love Spider-Man, but there's not really a lot to it other than it's really fun to swing around.
Yeah,
it's not like when a major story game comes out, like when The Last of Us and God of War come out, and they're like, "Oh, don't post spoilers." There are spoilers you can post for Spider-Man because this villain's in it, that villain's in it, but mainly it's just, look, I did a backflip, and it felt like Dragonflight was the look, I did a backflip of WoW.
Yeah, there are important beats in there. Sure. There, like it won't be completely forgotten, like it never happened. But yeah, like it's like the primalists and the dragons returning to their homeland, and I barely remember any of it. And it's not even that old, and I really don't even remember what that story was about. But yeah, this is the platonic ideal of WoW, I think. And I think people are really psyched about it, even though this is definitely early days. We're going to be talking about this story for probably 6 years. It's going to take to unfold this whole thing.
We've been speaking about Destiny for a long time, and that's had a lot of moments like that, where it's like at the start of something great, and a lot of the times it was able to kind of, crest that wave into something a lot bigger. So, future's bright, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay, I think that's all I got. Thanks for hanging out and talking WoW with me again.
Cool. I'm an expert. I'm the roller coaster.
Yeah. I got to check out that roller coaster. And thank you all at home for listening and watching. I will have that full review linked down in the description. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and visit us at thegamer.com. That's The Gamer, no spaces.